Hi, I'm Tim McNeil. I'm the writer of Itzhak Babel and the Black Sea, playing at the Stella Adler Theater from February 9th to March 11th, and I'm also directing. He is a role model, and in my entire life here in this country, I have never felt the specter of censorship on speech. But at this particular moment, you can see shades of it, not the depth of Stalin era Soviet Union, but the desire to censor opinions and to stop the press or silence the press breaks my heart, and it's something that all Americans should be resisting. And in fact, all people, all citizens, in the world, but certainly in America, it's a real issue right now. And Babel's story speaks to that. How does a human being survive a totalitarian regime, and in fact, not just survive, but resist and hold on to their integrity as a human being? And that's partly what the story is about. When he started writing those stories, he became connected to his characters in a way that really playwrights are not, I don't think. Because Benya's in many of the stories, the gangster. He's in many of the stories, and it started to live inside of Babel. And then there was the stories from the Red Cavalry. And so many of those stories, they are acts of the imagination. And they're remarkable, but a lot of people took them as stone cold fact, truth. But there is invention in them, because if you compare his diary from that time and the writing, Red Cavalry stories, it's a little different. And I think that what he began to do the things that writers are now doing constantly, which is blurring the lines between fact and fiction, or nonfiction and fiction, and finding their way that way. And the things that obsess them and move them the most, they keep them. And it's like the old narrative forms that used to hold sway have sort of been blown apart. And I think that's happened not just in novels, in short stories, but also in plays. And certainly poetry has gone through a remarkable change. They seem as remarkable as ever. The Soviet Union Russia it's their greatest gift, is their poets. And I think that they're still just as strong. But I will say this, he would be in America right now, he would see the danger, and he would be resisting as well, in whatever way he could. Nobody's taken away my free speech. But the taste of it is in the air. And that's what everybody should be aware of, because we have never thought it could happen here. But, who knows? And so what I see in America right now is remarkable writers stepping up, remarkable poets stepping up, musicians, all of them really starting to create with the idea of resistance in mind to something that is really not the same as Stalin-era Russia, but something very powerful, maybe even more powerful than Stalin. It's the influence of money, of a desire to repress opinions, all driven by the dollar, from my perspective. And so, I don't know, it's a very powerful mix that normal Americans are facing right now. Very powerful adversaries. And, a friend of mine described what is happening in this country as a very slow-moving coup. And I'm not sure he's not right. So resistance is imperative. This is a little bit of resistance, I would say. I hope. Babel might laugh at that. He might laugh at what I was saying. Do you know what I mean? He might, because he was watched. He could not speak. I can still speak. But Americans are resistant to any kind of limits to free speech. And we can feel something happening, and we don't like it. Do you know what I mean? And so that's what it is. Babel would laugh. He goes, "You're freer than any people I've ever experienced, but, not free enough." And there's a quote that the grandmother told his sister Miriam one time, that Babel is a horse, you are a pig, which is very harsh, because I'm sure Miriam was remarkably intelligent as well. But they thought of Babel as something remarkable that needed to be nurtured and lifted. And that's what they did. They helped him along and got him into the best schools they could. Jewish kids could not get into the best schools in Russia, but they got him into the best they could. And he excelled in anything he was interested in, do you know what I mean? But they loved him, and they treated him like a prodigy, which he was, Yeah. Certainly Kuleshov is probably the one that is the one with the deepest secret. And his secret is that he doesn't approve of the destruction of the creative class in Russia, even though he works for the NKVD. That's a fictional idea, because I don't know if any of Babel's interrogators were actually sympathetic to him. I wanted to believe it. And I think Kuleshov is the one holding that secret and holding a grain of the future in him, And I think there's also Prishepa, who is actually a character from Babel's writing, who I fictionalized as well. And I think Prishepa is holding on to something really dear and important, which is the old truths. Compassion, empathy, decency. And he's struggling to find his way back to that. Do you know what I mean? And those two characters are the pivots that the play floats around, Now we're freer with the sensuality, and but there's so much imagination in what was back then, I would have to say. I don't know, I didn't live back then, but just everything was imagined between a man and a woman, right? And Babel fell in love with Antonina, not only for her beauty, she was remarkably beautiful, but because she was an extraordinary human being in her own right. She was a builder of a society. And he was drawn to her as much as she was drawn to him. And they were a perfect match. Especially the Antonina monologue was the hardest, because it's about the loss of him. Literally, Antonina, after he was gone, she could never find out what happened to him. And people would show up at her door and tell her lies about where he was. And it's heartbreaking to me. That's that kind of cruelty. And no doubt it was the NKVD that did that. And I don't understand that. Just leave her alone. If you're not going to tell her what happened to him, leave her alone. Because she waited for, I think it was 13, 14 years for notice. And he had died like a year after he was taken in. So I don't understand that. To witness and try and witness in a way that had the truth of the soul in it, but maybe not the whole truth of what happened day to day or moment to moment, but it was Babel's truth, I hope, because I think it takes extraordinary courage to witness a century, a period of change and tumult like revolutionary Russia and Stalin-era Russia. And it takes an amazing amount of courage. And he did that. At some point in my research, I was just like, how am I ever going to get this man? I love this man. And so I just shifted focus a little bit. I didn't want to write a bioplay anymore. I wanted to write an act of the imagination about this man who is one of my heroes, to be honest. Flawed. Beautiful, crazy, At one point, one of the characters asks him if he has a death wish, because there's this quote of him, and he told Osip Mandelstam, the great poet, I think, I might be getting the quote wrong, but he told him, Mandelstam asked him, why do you hang out with the NKVD, the secret police? What are you doing? Why are you so close to them? And he said, I need to have a taste of it. I want to taste them. His curiosity and his desire to know was overwhelming, and it put him in danger a lot. There's a moment where he says to Margarita, she asked him what are his goals, and he said, to overcome mystery. I hate mystery. And I don't know if he ever would have said that, but certainly I think he was always trying to know and learn. And I'm in touch with that. I believe in that. So everything began to make sense of what it means to be a writer, and how writers will write the questions they need answered. And those questions are usually ongoing and never satisfied, And so when I was working in those classes, the imagination was a given, because not only was I sitting there listening to these great writers, I was projecting into their lives and what made them write, And I started thinking, well, I have these problems. I have these questions that I want answered. Why don't I try it? Just like that. I said, I bet I could do that. And I did. One day I started writing, and it's an ongoing process. I'm no Chekhov, and I'm no Arthur Miller or any of those giants, but I am committed to growing. And that's important for any writer, I think. Just think about it that way and leave the giants alone, This place is a temple of the imagination. Do you know what I mean? It's a crazy place. This place is madness. And it's devoted to the imagination. And I will say this, that for each one of the actors, it is a true act of the imagination to get inside of these characters and to project themselves into this period of Russian history. I think sometimes people come to the theater like it's taking medicine, you know? And I hate that part of it because I love theater, you know? And I don't blame them because there's so many times when people are let down by theater. But I'll say this, come alert and listen, and maybe something will happen. If you have a chance, just look up Babel online or read one of his amazing short stories and come see it, because he's a human being that deserves to be remembered. And I think we do that in the play.